The mop clattered to the floor at exactly 7:54 a.m., its metal handle echoing through the maintenance building like a gunshot. William Bill Hutchins stood frozen, staring at the badge Detective Sarah Martinson held inches from his face, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly as 4 tactical officers fanned out behind her. For 42 years, he'd cleaned these floors, fixed these lockers, held keys to every room in Clearwater Elementary School. For 42 years, he'd lived among them, smiled at their children, attended their church services. And now, on a Thursday morning in March 2024, when Montana snow still clung to the surrounding peaks, that carefully constructed life was about to collapse, with the finality of a building demolished by dynamite. "William Hutchins, you're under arrest for the murder of Kayla Lynn Brennan." The words hit him like physical blows. His knees buckled. He grabbed the doorframe, fingers white-knuckled, desperate. "No," he whispered, then louder, voice cracking. "No, that was 42 years ago. I helped search for her. I was there. You can't—" "Turn around, hands behind your back." Hutchins tried to run. He lurched toward the back exit, stumbling over his own feet, but Officer Marcus Chen was faster. Chen's shoulder slammed into Hutchins's chest, driving him against the concrete wall hard enough to crack plaster. Hutchins gasped. The air knocked from his lungs, and Chen's hands were already pulling his arms back, metal handcuffs clicking shut with surgical precision. As Chen stepped back, something fell from Hutchins's shirt pocket. A photograph, edges worn from years of handling, fluttered to the floor face up. Kayla Brennan's school portrait from 1982. Strawberry blonde hair, wire-rimmed glasses. That smile. Martinson stared at it, bile rising in her throat. "You've been carrying her picture for 42 years. Hutchins's eyes met hers, tears streaming down his weathered face. "I never forgot her face, not for a single day." "Don't," Hutchins sobbed, breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please, I've been good. I've tried to be good. God knows I've tried." Outside, teachers were arriving for the school day. Principal Andrea Walsh reached the maintenance building first, drawn by the patrol cars, the tactical officers, the impossible scene unfolding before her. She watched Bill Hutchins, the man who'd fixed her office thermostat just yesterday, being dragged out in handcuffs, his face contorted with fear and something darker, something that looked like relief. "Bill?" Walsh's voice broke. "What's happening? There must be some mistake." Martinson met her eyes. "This is no mistake, Principal Walsh. Mr. Hutchins is being charged with murder. You'll need to inform the staff immediately and prepare for an emergency lockdown. No children should see this." But they already had. In the schoolyard, 4th graders stopped mid-game, pointing. A teacher, Mrs. Patterson, pushed through the gathering crowd. She'd worked at Clearwater Elementary for 23 years, knew Hutchins as well as anyone. "Wait," Patterson called out, voice shaking. "Bill, tell them this is a mistake." Hutchins looked at her, then passed her to the school building, the playground equipment he'd maintained for decades, the children's faces pressed against classroom windows. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Patterson's face crumpled. "For what? Bill, for what?" But officers were already guiding Hutchins toward the patrol car. As the door opened, he looked back one final time. His eyes found the maintenance building, the keys still hanging on the hook inside, the life he'd built brick by brick over 42 years. Then he collapsed into the back seat, forehead hitting the metal grate separating front from back, and the sound that came from his throat wasn't quite human. A wail, raw and animal, the sound of a man whose carefully constructed mask had finally shattered beyond repair. By 8:30 that morning, Clearwater, Montana, population 2,100, nestled in the Bitterroot Valley, where everyone knew everyone, and doors stayed unlocked, was waking to news that would shatter its understanding of safety, trust, and the man they'd let into their children's lives for 42 years. To understand how William Hutchins lived free for so long while Kayla Brennan's family waited for justice, you have to go back to a February night in 1982, when Clearwater was a place where children still walked home alone, and monsters didn't look like monsters. Kayla Lynn Brennan was 14 years old on February 11th, 1982. Strawberry blonde hair, wire-rimmed glasses, dreams of becoming a veterinarian. She was the kind of girl teachers described as responsible and mature beyond her years. The oldest of 4 siblings, who helped her mother Susan with groceries and babysat neighborhood kids for extra money. Every Saturday morning she volunteered at the Bitterroot Animal Shelter, arriving early to clean cages and comfort dogs that nobody wanted. Her father Dennis worked at the lumber mill 6 miles outside town, and the Brennan family lived in a modest 2-story house on Willow Street, where neighbors borrowed sugar and children played in yards without supervision. February 11th was a Thursday. School let out at 3:15 p.m., but Kayla stayed late for math club, a voluntary program for students preparing for state competitions. Her best friend Jennifer Caldwell usually walked home with her, but Jennifer was home sick with the flu that week. Susan Brennan expected Kayla home by 4:30. The walk from Clearwater Junior High to the Brennan house was exactly 1.2 miles, a route Kayla had traveled hundreds of times. Straight down River Road, past the elementary school, across the bridge, then left onto Willow Street. The weather that afternoon was brutal. A late-season blizzard had blown in from the northwest, dropping temperatures into single digits, dumping 3 inches of fresh snow per hour. By 4 p.m., visibility was down to less than 50 feet, wind gusts reaching 35 miles per hour. The roads were empty, except for a few vehicles crawling through whiteout conditions. At 5:15 p.m., Susan Brennan called the school. The janitor who answered, a young man named Bill Hutchins, who'd worked at Clearwater Elementary for 3 years, checked the junior high building across the parking lot and reported that all classrooms were empty, lights off, doors locked. Susan's concern shifted to panic. She called Dennis at the mill. He left immediately, arriving home at 5:45 to find his wife pacing the kitchen, phone in her trembling hand. By 6 p.m., Dennis and 3 neighbors were driving slowly along River Road, with flashlights, searching ditches, calling Kayla's name through howling wind. At 6:32 p.m., Dennis Brennan found Kayla's backpack lying in the snow near the elementary school maintenance entrance. He saw it from 50 feet away, that flash of red fabric against white snow, and his entire world stopped. He stumbled forward, legs going numb, breath freezing in his throat. The backpack was open, contents scattered, textbooks, notebooks, pens, her student ID card with her smiling face staring up at him from the snow. Dennis dropped to his knees, hands shaking so violently he couldn't pick anything up. He just knelt there in the freezing wind, staring at his daughter's things, knowing with terrible certainty that Kayla was gone. "No," he whispered to the empty road. "No, no, no, no." His neighbor found him like that 5 minutes later, still kneeling, snow accumulating on his shoulders, Kayla's backpack clutched against his chest, like he could somehow hold on to her by holding on to the last thing she'd touched. At 6:47 p.m., Dennis called Clearwater Police Department. By 7 p.m., every available officer, volunteer firefighter, and able-bodied adult in Clearwater was searching. The blizzard made it nearly impossible, temperatures dropping to -8 degrees, snow accumulation reaching 8 inches. Searchers worked in teams, checking yards, sheds, abandoned buildings, anywhere a 14-year-old girl might have sought shelter. William Hutchins joined the search at 7:30 p.m., offering to unlock the schools so volunteers could check inside. Chief Matthews accepted gratefully. Hutchins spent 3 hours opening classrooms, gymnasiums, storage rooms, basements, moving through the buildings with his massive ring of keys, checking every space, while knowing exactly what they wouldn't find. By midnight, the search was suspended. The storm was too severe. Wind chills life-threatening. Susan Brennan sat in her living room surrounded by neighbors, staring at the phone, praying. Dennis paced, unable to sit, unable to stop moving, his mind cycling through possibilities that grew darker with each passing hour. The blizzard continued through the night. By morning, Clearwater was buried under 14 inches of fresh snow. The search resumed at dawn with over 200 volunteers, including Montana State Police and search dogs from Missoula. The dogs picked up Kayla's scent near where her backpack had been found, then lost it completely at the edge of the Bitterroot River. Divers searched the river despite dangerous conditions. Nothing. Helicopters flew grid patterns over surrounding forest. Nothing. Door-to-door interviews covered every household. No one had seen Kayla after 4 p.m. The investigation that followed consumed Clearwater for months. Chief Howard Matthews requested help from Montana State Police. Lead investigator Detective Raymond Walsh established a command center in the high school library, walls covered with maps, timelines, photographs of Kayla, the theory that dominated. Kayla had been abducted by someone driving along River Road during the blizzard. The scattered backpack suggested a struggle. The lost scent at the river suggested a vehicle. For weeks, the focus centered on a trucker named Carl Preston, who'd been making a delivery around 4 p.m. Preston had a prior assault conviction in Idaho. He'd been seen driving south on River Road around the time Kayla would have been walking. He was questioned 3 times, polygraphed, his truck searched thoroughly. His alibi barely held. After his delivery, he'd driven straight to Missoula, arriving at a truck stop by 6:15 p.m., confirmed by receipt. The timing was tight, but possible. Investigators believed Preston was their man. They just needed one more piece of evidence. They never found it. By summer 1982, the investigation stalled. Over 400 interviews conducted, every lead exhausted, no body recovered. Chief Matthews held a press conference in July, announcing the case would remain open, but active leads had dried up. For Dennis and Susan Brennan, normalcy never returned. Susan quit her job as a bank teller, unable to function in public. Dennis continued working at the mill, but colleagues said he became a ghost. Their 3 younger children grew up in a house where grief occupied every room, where Kayla's bedroom stayed exactly as it had been, where anniversaries became rituals of mourning. Every year, on February 11th, the Brennan family held a vigil at Clearwater Elementary, where Kayla's backpack had been found. In early years, hundreds attended. Over time, crowds thinned. By the 1990s, often just the Brennans and a handful of faithful friends remained. But one person attended every single vigil without fail: William Hutchins, standing quietly at the back, head bowed, apparently paying respects to a girl he claimed to barely remember. In 2007, at the 25th anniversary vigil, Hutchins stood beside Susan Brennan as she wept over the memorial plaque the town had installed. He placed his hand on her shoulder, squeezed gently. The February wind cut through the parking lot, but neither of them moved. "I'll never stop looking for her," Hutchins whispered, voice thick with emotion that seemed genuine. Susan, tears streaming down her face, turned and squeezed his hand. "You're like family, Bill. One of the few who stayed." Hutchins looked away, unable to meet her eyes. "I'll always be here," he said quietly. And he meant it. Because staying close to the Brennans, attending their vigils, watching their grief unfold year after year, that was his penance, and his addiction. The only way he could live with what he'd done was to witness what it had cost. Behind them, Dennis watched the exchange, jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. He'd never trusted Hutchins, couldn't explain why. Something about the way the janitor was always there, always watching, always so helpful. But he said nothing. What could he say? The man had been cleared in 1982. Everyone else in Clearwater considered Hutchins a saint for his dedication to Kayla's memory. Only Dennis saw the truth hiding behind Hutchins's grief-stricken expression. He just couldn't prove it. William Bill Hutchins had come to Clearwater in 1979, hired as maintenance worker after the previous janitor retired. He was 22, a Montana native who'd grown up in small towns, son of a logger and a nurse. References described him as reliable, hard-working, good with his hands. Over years, Hutchins became a fixture. He knew the building better than anyone. Teachers relied on him. Children liked him because he was kind, but never intrusive. He'd wave in hallways, help kids who dropped things, but maintained professional distance that parents found reassuring. Hutchins never married, lived alone in a rental house on the edge of town. Neighbors described him as polite, private, someone who kept to himself, but would help if needed. He attended Clearwater Community Church sporadically, had no criminal record, nothing that would raise concern. And every February 11th, for 42 years, William Hutchins attended Kayla Brennan's vigil, standing at the back, head bowed, playing the role of concerned community member, while knowing exactly what he'd done and where he'd put her body. Breakthrough that would finally destroy Hutchins's facade began in 2021 when Clearwater elected a new sheriff. Catherine Rivera had grown up in town, remembered Kayla's disappearance from childhood. She'd studied criminal justice at University of Montana, worked as a detective in Billings, then returned home determined to bring modern investigative techniques to rural law enforcement. One of Rivera's first acts, reviewing cold cases. Kayla Brennan's file was stored in the basement evidence room, 12 boxes of reports and physical evidence sealed since the mid-1980s. Among items preserved, Kayla's backpack, textbooks, and several swabs taken from the backpack straps in 1982 that had tested negative for blood, but positive for trace amounts of unknown biological material. In 1982, DNA analysis didn't exist for criminal investigations. Those swabs had been labeled and filed away. Rivera sent them to Montana State Crime Lab with a simple question. Can you get DNA from these? The answer came back March 2023. Yes. Using modern extraction techniques, the lab recovered a partial DNA profile from cells transferred to the backpack straps. The profile was entered into CODIS. No match. But in December 2023, the lab tried forensic genetic genealogy. The DNA was uploaded to a public ancestry database. Within weeks, the genealogy search connected to relatives in Montana and Washington. The trail led to a family line that included 3 brothers, born in the 1950s and 60s. 2 were deceased. 1 was alive, living in Clearwater, working as an elementary school janitor. William Eugene Hutchins. On February 8, 2024, Detective Martinson received the report. She sat in her office at Montana State Police headquarters, reading the name, unable to process what she was seeing. Bill Hutchins, the janitor who'd helped search, who'd attended every vigil, who'd worked at Clearwater Elementary for 45 years. For the next month, investigators tracked Hutchins's movements. The interrogation room at Montana State Police headquarters was deliberately uncomfortable. Gray concrete walls, single metal table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, fluorescent lights that cast everything in harsh shadows. No windows, no clock. Just William Hutchins in an orange jumpsuit, hands cuffed to a steel ring embedded in the table, and Detective Sarah Martinson sitting across from him with a folder she hadn't opened yet. Hutchins had been in custody for 6 hours, booked, photographed, fingerprinted, strip-searched. The transformation from respected janitor to inmate had been brutally efficient. Now he sat, slumped in the chair, face pale, eyes red from crying, looking 20 years older than the man who'd been mopping floors that morning. Martinson let the silence stretch. She'd learned that silence was often more effective than questions. Let suspects sit with their guilt. Let them imagine what evidence existed. Let them talk themselves into confessions. After 5 minutes, Hutchins broke. "How did you find me?" His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. Martinson opened the folder, pulled out the DNA report, slid it across the table. "Forensic genetic genealogy. Your second cousin uploaded their DNA to an ancestry website 3 years ago. They had no idea they were identifying a killer." Hutchins stared at the document like it was written in a foreign language. 42 years. I thought enough time had passed. I thought the evidence was too old. Science doesn't forget, Mr. Hutchins. DNA doesn't degrade on a timeline that benefits murderers. Hutchins's hand started trembling, the handcuffs rattling against the table. I tried to be good. After what I did, I spent every day trying to make up for it. By organizing memorial services, by attending vigils, by standing next to Susan Brennan and pretending to care. Martinson's voice remained flat, professional, but rage simmered beneath every word. Hutchins flinched. I did care. That's the worst part. I cared about that family. I watched them suffer for 42 years, and I couldn't tell them. I couldn't give them peace. Then give them peace now. Tell me what happened to Kayla Brennan. The confession came slowly, painfully, like extracting a splinter embedded for decades. Hutchins started with February 11th, 1982. The blizzard. School closing early. Him working late in the elementary school maintenance building, salting walkways, checking boilers. I saw her walking on River Road around 4:15. The snow was so bad, I could barely see 50 feet. She was hunched against the wind, struggling. I thought I was being helpful when I pulled my truck alongside and offered her a ride. Martinson said nothing. Let him talk. She hesitated. She knew me from the school, but she was smart enough to be cautious. I told her I'd just call her parents and let them know I was driving her home. That convinced her. She got in. Hutchins's voice broke. He pressed his cuffed hands against his eyes, shoulders shaking. I wasn't planning anything. I swear I wasn't. But she was sitting there, so close, and she smiled at me, thanked me for helping, and something in my brain just snapped. What did you do? I told her I needed to stop at the school first, get some tools from the maintenance building before the roads got worse. She didn't question it. Why would she? I was the janitor. Everyone trusted me. The words tumbled out faster now, like a dam breaking after 42 years. Hutchins described parking behind the elementary school, the maintenance entrance, leading Kayla inside, claiming he needed help carrying something, the basement storage room where he kept supplies. She walked in ahead of me. She was looking at the shelves, asking what I needed. I closed the door, locked it. When she turned around and saw my face, she knew. She knew something was wrong. Martinson's hands clenched beneath the table. What happened then? She tried to run, got to the door, started screaming. I grabbed her, put my hand over her mouth. She fought hard, harder than I expected. She bit my hand, kicked me, scratched my face. I still have the scar. Hutchins pulled back his collar, revealing a faint white line along his jaw. Her fingernail. February 11th, 1982. I told people I cut myself on sheet metal. How did she die? Hutchins was crying openly now, mucus and tears streaming down his face. I panicked. She was screaming so loud, even through my hand. I grabbed a length of rope we used for maintenance work. I just wanted her to stop screaming. I wrapped it around her neck. She fought for maybe 30 seconds. Then she stopped. The room fell silent except for Hutchins's sobbing. Martinson sat perfectly still, forcing herself to remain professional when every instinct screamed to reach across the table and strangle him with his own confession. Where did you put her body? The sub-basement. There's a crawl space beneath the main basement. Access through a hatch in the boiler room floor. It's been sealed since the 1960s when they updated the heating system. No one ever goes down there. I wrapped her in a tarp, put her in the crawl space, covered the hatch with the boiler. She's been there for 42 years. Right beneath the school, beneath the classrooms, beneath all those children. Martinson stood abruptly, chair scraping against concrete. She walked to the corner of the room, pressed her forehead against the cold wall, forced herself to breathe. When she turned back, her voice was ice. You cleaned that school for 42 years. You walked over her grave every single day. You watched Susan and Dennis Brennan hold vigils begging for information. You hugged them. You told them you'd never stop looking. And Kayla was in the basement the entire time. Hutchins nodded, face buried in his cuffed hands. I couldn't leave. Leaving would have been suspicious. So I stayed. I became part of the community. I made sure the school stayed maintained. I protected the crawl space. And I attended every vigil because it was the only way I could apologize. That's not an apology. That's torture. You tortured that family for 4 decades. I know. Martinson returned to the table, sat down, pulled out a second document. We searched your house this morning. Want to know what we found? Hutchins looked up, confusion on his face. A lockbox under your bed. Inside, newspaper clippings about Kayla's disappearance. Every article published in 42 years. Programs from memorial services. A copy of the scholarship fund certificate. And a journal. Martinson opened a photocopy of the journal's first page. Read aloud. February 12th, 1982. I killed Kayla Brennan yesterday. I can never undo what I did. The only path forward is to make sure she's never forgotten. I'll dedicate my life to her memory. Maybe that will be enough. Hutchins closed his eyes. I wrote in that journal for 42 years. Every anniversary, every vigil, every scholarship awarded. I documented everything. The last entry is dated March 13th, 2024. Yesterday. You wrote, "They're coming. I can feel it. Maybe it's finally time. Maybe 42 years is long enough. You knew we were close. I saw you at the diner last week, watching me. I saw the officers retrieve my coffee cup after I left. I'm not stupid. I knew what you were doing." Then why didn't you run? Hutchins met her eyes for the first time since the confession began. Because I've been running for 42 years. I'm tired. I want to stop. The excavation of Clearwater Elementary's sub-basement began at dawn on March 15th, 2024. The school was closed, students redirected to temporary facilities in the community center. State police forensic teams, cadaver dogs, and structural engineers surrounded the building. Media trucks lined the street, cameras recording everything. Sheriff Catherine Rivera stood in the parking lot where Dennis Brennan had found Kayla's backpack 42 years earlier, watching officers carry equipment into the school. Dennis stood beside her, now 87 years old, leaning on a cane, insisting on being present when they recovered his daughter. "She was here the whole time," Dennis said, voice hollow. "We held vigils 50 feet from her body. We cried and prayed and begged for information, and she was right here." Rivera placed a hand on his shoulder. "You couldn't have known." Hutchins knew. He stood next to me at those vigils. He comforted Susan. He organized fundraisers in Kayla's name. And she was in the basement of his school. Inside the maintenance building, forensic teams had removed the industrial boiler and exposed the hatch Hutchins described. The hatch was rusted shut, sealed with decades of paint and corrosion. It took 3 hours to cut through. When they finally pried it open, the smell that emerged confirmed what they'd find below. 2 technicians descended into the crawl space with lights and cameras. The space was narrow, claustrophobic, filled with ancient pipes and forgotten building materials. In the far corner, beneath decades of dust, they found a tarp-wrapped bundle. The recovery took another 4 hours. Every movement documented, every inch photographed. When they finally brought the remains to the surface, Dennis Brennan collapsed. Rivera caught him, helped him to a bench, held the old man while he wept for the daughter he'd lost twice. Once in 1982, and again today. The medical examiner confirmed the remains were consistent with a teenage female, approximate age 14. Dental records would provide final identification, but everyone knew. Kayla Lynn Brennan had been found. The news exploded across Montana, and then nationally. Beloved janitor arrested. Girl's body found in school basement after 42 years. Killer attended memorial services. The story had everything that made true crime compelling and horrifying. In Clearwater, the reaction was visceral. Parents who'd trusted Hutchins with their children struggled to process the betrayal. Former students who'd been coached by him, helped by him, comforted by him, faced the realization that a murderer had been part of their childhoods. At Clearwater Elementary, Principal Andrea Walsh called an emergency meeting for staff and families. The gymnasium filled with confused, angry, frightened people demanding answers. "How could this happen?" a mother shouted. "My daughter hugged Bill Hutchins at the winter concert. He was in our house for Christmas dinner. How could none of us see it?" Walsh had no good answers. Evil doesn't always look evil. William Hutchins was a master manipulator who spent 42 years perfecting a role. We were all deceived. Former teacher Mrs. Patterson, who'd witnessed the arrest, stood and spoke through tears. "I worked with Bill for 23 years. We had coffee together every Monday. He helped my son get a scholarship. I trusted him completely. And now I find out he murdered a child and hid her body beneath our feet while we taught classes above her. How do we come back from that?" The question hung in the air, unanswered, because there was no satisfactory response. Trust, once shattered, doesn't heal cleanly. It leaves scars. Kayla Brennan's funeral was held on April 2, 2024, at Clearwater Community Church. The church overflowed with mourners. 3 generations gathered to finally lay her to rest. Dennis Brennan sat in the front pew, barely holding himself together. Susan had died 8 years earlier from cancer, never knowing justice would come. Pastor Michael Chambers delivered the eulogy with an anger barely contained beneath professional composure. Kayla was stolen from us twice, once in 1982 when her life was taken, and again every day for 42 years when the man who killed her walked free, pretending to honor her memory while hiding the truth of what he'd done. The burial took place in Clearwater Cemetery, Kayla's casket lowered into the ground beside her mother's grave. Dennis stood at the edge, leaning heavily on his cane, watching his daughter finally laid to rest. As mourners filed past offering condolences, he remained motionless, unwilling or unable to leave. Sheriff Rivera approached, stood beside him in silence. Finally, Dennis spoke. "I always knew. Deep down, I always knew Hutchins was involved, but everyone told me I was paranoid. That grief was making me suspicious of innocent people. Now I find out my instincts were right, and I spent 42 years doubting myself. You couldn't have stopped him. Without DNA evidence, we had nothing. But maybe I could have prevented him from torturing Susan for 4 decades. She died not knowing. She died believing Kayla's killer would never be found. If I'd pushed harder, if I'd made people listen, maybe she could have had closure before the cancer took her." Rivera had no response because Dennis was right. Susan Brennan had died without justice. That would haunt everyone involved for the rest of their lives. The trial of William Hutchins began on September 9, 2024. Despite his confession, Montana law required formal proceedings. The courtroom in Missoula was packed, with overflow crowds watching via video link. Hutchins's court-appointed attorney, Robert Sterling, had an impossible task. The DNA evidence was irrefutable. The confession was detailed and voluntary. The body had been recovered exactly where Hutchins said it would be. Sterling's only strategy was emphasizing Hutchins's remorse and his decades of community service. Lead prosecutor Janet Morrison dismantled that argument methodically. The defendant claims remorse. But let's examine his actions. He murdered a 14-year-old girl. He hid her body in a school basement. He attended memorial services and comforted the victim's family, while knowing exactly what he'd done. He organized scholarship funds in her name as cover for his crime. He spent 42 years torturing the Brennan family with his presence. That's not remorse. That's sadism disguised as atonement. The evidence presentation was brief but devastating. The DNA match, the confession video, photographs of the crawlspace where Kayla had been hidden, testimony from forensic experts confirming cause of death. The most powerful moment came when Dennis Brennan testified. 87 years old, using a wheelchair, his voice shook, but his words cut like razors. William Hutchins didn't just kill my daughter. He killed my wife. Susan died believing we'd failed Kayla by not finding her killer. That guilt consumed her for 42 years, until cancer finally ended her suffering. Hutchins attended her funeral. He hugged me. He told me Susan was with Kayla now. And all I could think was that this monster was standing in front of me, offering comfort, when he was the reason my wife died broken-hearted. Hutchins sat at the defense table, head down, shoulders shaking. He didn't look up during Dennis's testimony, didn't offer explanation or apology, just sat there, destroyed by the weight of 42 years crashing down simultaneously. When given the opportunity to address the court before sentencing, Hutchins stood. His attorney advised against it, but Hutchins insisted. He looked directly at Dennis Brennan, tears streaming down his face. I have no excuse for what I did, no justification. I took Kayla from you in a moment of madness, and then I spent 42 years compounding that crime by pretending to care while hiding her body. I thought if I did enough good, if I dedicated my life to her memory, somehow, it would balance what I'd done. I was wrong. Nothing balances this. I destroyed your family. I destroyed this community's trust. I destroyed myself. I'm sorry doesn't mean anything, but it's all I have left. Dennis stared at Hutchins, face carved from stone. When the courtroom fell silent, waiting for a response, Dennis spoke a single sentence. I hope you live a long time in prison. I hope every day feels like 42 years. Judge Helena Martinez delivered the sentence on September 12, 2024. Her voice carried the moral authority of someone who'd seen evil in many forms, but rarely this calculated. Mr. Hutchins, you are sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole. The people of Montana have determined you will never again walk free. You will die behind bars. And when you do, your name will be remembered only as a cautionary tale about how evil can hide behind a smile for decades. Court adjourned. Hutchins showed no reaction. Officers led him from the courtroom in shackles. As the doors closed behind him, Dennis Brennan closed his eyes and released a breath he'd been holding for 42 years. Justice had finally come to Clearwater. In the months following Hutchins's conviction, Clearwater Elementary faced a decision. The building where Kayla had been hidden was structurally sound, but psychologically contaminated. No parent wanted their child educated in a place where a murdered girl had been concealed for 4 decades. In November 2024, the school board voted unanimously to demolish the building. A new elementary school would be constructed on a different site. The old building would be razed, the land converted to a memorial park dedicated to Kayla Brennan. The demolition began on December 1, 2024. Dennis Brennan attended, watching from his wheelchair as heavy machinery tore down the structure that had been Kayla's tomb. With each wall that fell, it felt like closure. Not healing. Closure was all that remained. By spring 2025, the memorial park was complete. A simple design: open grass, walking paths, benches, and a granite monument at the center engraved with Kayla's photograph and the dates of her birth and death. Beneath her image, a single sentence: found at last. Never forgotten. On the first anniversary of Kayla's second funeral, April 2, 2025, the community gathered at the new park. Hundreds attended. Former students who'd never known Kayla but had grown up hearing her story. Teachers who'd worked alongside Hutchins and still struggled with the betrayal. Parents teaching their children that monsters can look like anyone. Dennis Brennan, now 88, was wheeled to the monument. He placed a single red rose at its base, the same flower Susan had left at Kayla's memorial every year before cancer took her. As he sat staring at his daughter's photograph, tears streaming into his white beard, Sheriff Rivera approached. "She's at peace now," Rivera said gently. Dennis nodded. "And Hutchins is in a cell. That's something. It's not enough. It'll never be enough. But it's something." 3 months later, on July 8, 2025, Dennis Brennan died peacefully in his sleep. He was buried between his wife and daughter in Clearwater Cemetery. At his funeral, Pastor Chambers spoke about a man who'd carried unimaginable grief for 4 decades, but had lived long enough to see justice served. Dennis never stopped fighting for Kayla. He never stopped believing the truth would emerge, and because he didn't give up, because Sheriff Rivera didn't give up, because science didn't give up, evil was finally brought to light. That's Dennis Brennan's legacy. Persistence in the face of impossible darkness. William Hutchins remains in Montana State Prison, serving life without parole. He's 65 years old now, in declining health, unlikely to survive another decade. He spends most days in his cell, refusing visitors, declining interviews. The man who spent 42 years surrounded by community and trust now lives in isolation, stripped of everything except the memory of what he did. On February 11th each year, guards report that Hutchins becomes agitated, pacing his cell, muttering to himself. It's the anniversary of Kayla's death, the day his 42-year lie began, the day that destroyed 2 families and shattered a town's innocence. Clearwater Elementary Memorial Park remains a gathering place. Parents bring children to play. Teachers hold outdoor classes. Teenagers study for exams on the benches. And on warm Montana evenings, when the sun sets over the Bitterroot Mountains, people sometimes leave flowers at Kayla's monument, red roses, remembering a girl who dreamed of becoming a veterinarian, who died at 14, who spent 42 years hidden beneath a school, who was finally found, who will never be forgotten. Justice came late to Clearwater. But it came. And in a world where cold cases often stay cold forever, that has to mean something.